Hi, and welcome to another in a series of technology tips. Today's tip focuses on Excel 2019 and its 5 best new features. My name is Tommy Stevens. I'm with K2 Enterprises. Thanks for joining us today. We are going to jump momentarily into some live demonstration of these 5 new features in Excel that I'm so excited about. But before we do that, just a little bit of background information would probably be useful for you. Keep in mind that Excel 2019 was released in September of 2018. Therefore, if you do have access to Excel 2019, you will have access to all of these new features. And also, if you are an Office 365 subscriber and are on version 1808 or newer of Excel as provided through an Office 365 subscription, you too will have access to the 5 new features that I will be demonstrating momentarily. Additionally, I think it's important to understand that with Excel 2019, Microsoft did not release a tremendous number of new features. In fact, the number of new features was relatively small, but I think there was a lot of substance to the features that they did add to Excel. In other words, I think we could say that this is clearly a case of quality over quantity. And then finally, although each person's definition of best is likely to be different, the 5 features that I'm going to talk about in this session are receiving a lot of attention, and deservedly so, because they help to solve a lot of problems that many people have been having with Excel. So what are these top 5 new features in Excel 2019, at least in my opinion? 2 new data types. As you'll see in a moment, we now have the opportunity of taking advantage of these data types, stock data types and geography data types, which bring a little bit of artificial intelligence into Excel and will automatically retrieve data for us. Along the artificial intelligence lines, we have the topic or the new feature of ideas. Ideas is a tool in Excel that can automatically analyze our data for us and identify trends and hidden patterns in the data that you and I might not have seen with the naked eye. There are a couple of new chart types that I believe are receiving deserved attention. We will see what those look like. Map charts and funnel charts are new to Excel 2019. Additionally, Excel 2019 provides us with 6 new functions, a couple of which I think are going to be very, very useful for many business professionals. And then finally, Excel 2019 gives us what we call default pivot table layouts. This is something that many of you have been clamoring for a long period of time, the ability to set layouts for your pivot tables, memorize those layouts such that all future new pivot tables are formatted the same way. Let's do live demonstrations of each of these 5 new features in Excel 2019, beginning with 2 new data types. Now we're going to work rather quickly through each of these, but give you enough substance where I think you'll be able to go back to your office or go back to your desk and take advantage of these tools. As you can see, I have on or embedded in this Excel spreadsheet a series of stock ticker symbols, Amgen, Apple, AT&T, and some other stocks. Looks like you even have a duplicate in there. So let me go ahead and address that. What I would like to do with each of these ticker symbols is reach out and retrieve corresponding information from the stocks that each of these ticker symbols represents. To do that, I am going to select that column of data in the table, and I'm going to go to the Data tab of the ribbon, and on the Data tab of the ribbon, I'm going to convert each of those ticker symbols into what is known now as a stock type in Excel 2019. Now, upon doing so, Excel immediately recognized most of the stocks there, but as you see, it was struggling understanding what I meant with the ticker symbol of BAC. So it opened a task pane over on the right-hand side of the screen. And what I will do is look through this task pane until I see Bank of America Corporation, which was indeed the stock that I intended to select. I'll click the select button, and now you can see that it's recognizing BAC as Bank of America. Now, in and of itself, that's not that exciting until we begin to realize what we can do with these new data types, in this case, the stock data type. Notice up here in the upper left-hand corner of what is now cell B1, I will click that Add Column icon and tell Excel that I want to pull in the 52-week high for each of these stocks. I'll repeat that process over in column C. Let's get the 52-week low. I'll look over and say that I want to pull in, for example, the current price over in column D, and perhaps the price to earnings multiple over in column E. And I can continue to do that all the way across this spreadsheet for all of these different stocks and for all of this information that is available for each of these different stocks. Now, obviously, it looks like with uh, Intrazon Corp, which is trading on the NASDAQ under the ticker symbol XON. That company must have had negative earnings, I'm guessing, in the past, or otherwise, that must be why we're getting an error message there on that particular that particular column, the price to earnings multiple. So what this does again is it links that information in, and as we go throughout the course of the day, all of this information will change, particularly the price and the price to earnings multiple ratios. Those will change as this information being fed from the stock market changes. So this is a fantastic way of being able to do portfolio analysis, calculations on unrealized gains and losses, things of that nature in a portfolio. Now, in addition to stock data types, we also have geography data types. We won't step all the way through this example in the interest of time, but basically what happened in this case is I entered the city names in column A. I then reached up and converted those from the data tab of the ribbon into geography data types, and that then gave me the opportunity, just as we had with stock data types, I can now pull in information. For example, in this case, I'll pull in time zones, and now I've got the various time zones for each of those cities sitting inside the spreadsheet. It's important to understand that because I place this data inside tables, that if I later go down and just simply in cell A9, let's type in Boston, for example. Notice how the moment I typed in Boston, Excel recognized that that too was another city, and it pulled in all of the information relative to Boston into the spreadsheet. So these new data types, stock data types, geography data types, really help us to go in and link or retrieve data off the web, embed it into our spreadsheets, and then the spreadsheets that we're developing here are intelligent enough to link that data such that it updates periodically, and also to automatically expand as we add additional data into the table. Again, two new data types, stock data types and geography data types. The next new feature to consider is that of ideas. Now, ideas, much like stock and data types, represents artificial intelligence inside Excel. The selling point, if you will, of ideas is that ideas will automatically analyze our data for us. I have around 2,000 rows of data in this spreadsheet. Actually, I think it's a little closer to 3,000 rows. And I need to very quickly analyze this data to help me understand, is there something going on in our company of which I might not be aware? So notice that I'm just going to click anywhere inside that data range, and then from the Home tab of the ribbon on the right-hand side, I'm clicking Ideas. When I click Ideas, Ideas is now analyzing my data, and momentarily, as you will see, in fact, it just populated, it has brought back to me about, in this case, I believe around 35 different summarizations of the data. And it's telling me, for example, that salesperson number 7, it looks like, leads the way in terms of order amounts. And it's also saying that salesperson number 7 has 5 sales orders that look out of line with respect to all of the other sales orders. And it says that for customer ID number 12, so for customer number 12, employee number 3 has a noticeably higher order amount. So what's employee number 3 being able to do with customer number 12 that's allowing him or her to basically more than double the average sales amount relative to all other employees? Notice that with respect to each of these analytics that IDEA has brought to me, they're all in the form of pivot charts. And what I can do if I wanted to build a more, let's call it, formal report, I could just simply click on Insert Pivot Chart, and now that pivot chart is embedded inside my spreadsheet. And by the way, looking back in the Ideas pane on the right-hand side, notice near the bottom, it's actually generated a list of 35 different results for us. And we could then click and scroll through each of those 35 results to see what, to see the hidden trends, to see the hidden meaning in the data. Automated data analysis with Ideas. That is new in Excel 2019. Excel 2019 also adds 2 new chart types for us. We won't spend a tremendous amount of time on these, although I do think you'll find them to be useful. One of the new chart types is that of a funnel chart. Looking at the data that we have in column A and column B in this spreadsheet, it's sales activity. We started the month, or at least throughout the month, we had a total of 371 prospect contacts, but we ultimately closed 23 deals during the month. So what I'd like to do is build this funnel chart that shows us how we got from point A, the total number of prospect contacts, all the way down to the total number of closed sales, 23. And all I had to do in this case was simply click anywhere inside the data range, click on the Insert tab of the ribbon. I'll choose Recommended Charts, and under Recommended Charts, notice that the fourth one from the top is that of a funnel chart. Clicking on the funnel chart and clicking OK places that chart inside the spreadsheet. So again, think of a funnel chart as a way of being able to tell a story. How did we get from point A to point B? Now, another new chart type in Excel 2019 is a map chart. And as its name implies, a map chart is there to plot data at a geospatial level. In this case, I chose to plot by state and also by Canadian province. So I wanted to know, for example, I'm a large multinational company maybe, and I want to know how many team members we have in each of these states or provinces. Basically, all I have to do is list out the states and the provinces, list out the number of team members, and then once again, from the Insert tab of the ribbon, I can go and click on Map Charts to create my map chart. You have not really had very good mapping capabilities, map chart capabilities, that is, in Excel up until Excel 2019, but the new mapping tool is quite good. The map chart tool is quite good. Now, I would be remiss if I did not also point out to you in certain versions of Excel the availability of the 3D Maps engine. That's a much different tool that goes all the way back to Excel 2010. Arguably, that allows you to plot data at a much more detailed level. In fact, with the 3D Maps tool, you can plot all the way down to the street address and or latitude, longitude coordinates if those needs ever arose. So far, we've talked about two new data types, we've talked about ideas, we've talked about new charts. Let's jump into a discussion of the 6 new functions that are now available in Excel 2019. As you can see, Microsoft did indeed provide 6 new functions, or add 6 new functions with Excel 2019. We'll quickly talk about a couple of these and also demonstrate a couple of these. The first one is Concat. And if that sounds familiar, yes, that is an abbreviated version of the older concatenate function. Know that Microsoft will be phasing out concatenate sometime in the future. Concat is there to replace it. Concat works exactly the same as concatenate. The only difference is it's obviously a shorter version of the function, at least from a spelling perspective. Now, I want to quote for you verbatim from Microsoft what their strategy is with respect to concatenate, and this is coming from Microsoft's website. Quote, "Although the concatenate function is still available for backward compatibility, you should consider using concat from now on. This is because concatenate may not be available in future versions of Excel." So you're warned. If you're using the old concatenate function, you should likely just no longer use it, but rather use the concat function instead. Maxifs and minifs, these are two functions that operate very similarly to the sumifs function and the averageifs function, both of which were added all the way back with Excel 2007. Maxifs performs multiple tests of your data and then identifies the largest value in a range where all of the tests are met. Minifs does the same thing, except of course it looks for the smallest value in a range. If you recall, the sumifs function allows you to sum data based on multiple conditions. Maxifs and minifs do the same thing. The only difference is one is giving you a maximum value, the other is giving you a minimum value. The text join function is one that I want to demonstrate for you. It's a rather interesting function that gives us more flexibility than using concat or some of the more traditional ways that we might have chosen to join data together. As you can see, I have a relatively small volume of data on the screen. Columns A through E contain data that I want to join together, concatenate together. There are many different ways I could approach this. The way I chose to approach it in this case is using the new text join function. So you can see in cell G2, I've written a formula that says text join, And then we've got a comma in parentheses, followed by a comma, the word true, followed by the range of A2 through E2. Now, it's obvious what the A2 through E2 stands for. Go join together the text in that range. The comma that's surrounded by parentheses, that is used to designate what we want inserted in our results between each of those cells that are joined together. Let me hit the escape key to make that a little more apparent. Notice in this example that between 101 Peachtree Street and apartment 2714, I have a comma appearing. Likewise, I have a comma appearing between the apartment number and the city, between the city and the state, and between the state and the zip. Yet notice that the data that's feeding into that formula does not have any commas whatsoever. By putting this comma, the very first argument inside the formula, by placing that comma there and surrounding it in quotation marks, I'm telling Excel to insert that comma as a delimiter within the concatenated text string. The only thing that's a little perhaps confusing at this point then is the argument of true. True in this case tells Excel to ignore any blank cells. Now the reason that's important would be evident based on the data in row number 3. Notice that in row number 3 we have no address number 2. We have no value under in cell B3. And if we had not placed the word true inside our text join function, then separating Palm Drive from Bakersfield, California, we would actually see 2 commas. 1 comma for the data in column A and a second comma for the data that is in column B. Well, that would look just out of place to have 2 commas there. That's why I put the word true in place. If 2 commas are appropriate, given the type of data that you have, place the word false in the formula instead. Skipping over the ifs function momentarily, the switch function does pretty much the same thing as the ifs function does. But as you will see momentarily, the ifs function is a little bit more flexible. So I will describe the ifs function in detail and then quickly make another reference back to the switch function. The ifs function, as you might guess by its name, allows us to perform multiple tests on our data without having to embed an if function multiple times in a formula. This is probably a little bit easier seen than it is discussed, so let's get into a live demonstration of it. Here we have a very, very simplified version of how to take advantage of the new ifs function. Let's start this conversation, though, by looking at how we would have handled something like this in a more traditional environment by using nested if functions instead. So let's examine the formula that I have in cell B3. If A1 equals 1, then we want blue, but if A1 equals 2, then we want yellow, but if A1 equals 3, we want green. Notice in this case, I have to, in the traditional environment, I have to repeat the if function. I have to nest that if function multiple times inside the same formula. Now, in this case, it's a relatively simple formula, so it's not that difficult to figure out what's going on. It's not that difficult to create the formula, but many of you have likely built much more sophisticated versions of nested if functions that can be challenging in some cases to create the formula and also to potentially troubleshoot the formula. Let's compare that to the formula that's in cell B5, which uses the new ifs function. When we look at this particular formula, notice that we start the formula with the ifs, not if, but ifs. We start the formula with the ifs function, and we only have to indicate the ifs function one time. We only have to put ifs in there one time throughout the formula. So we're not repeating the if function in these more traditional nested if function formulas. We get a much simpler, a much cleaner, a much easier to construct formula by using ifs instead. Now, very significantly, notice that the ifs function makes, in this case, multiple references to cell A1. That is not a requirement. I could have said if A1 equals 1, then blue, but if Q57, for example, equals 2, then make it yellow, and if Z1238 equals 3, then make it green. And the reason that I mention that is to get back into the discussion of the switch function that I mentioned just 1 second ago. The switch function does very much the same as the ifs function, except the switch function can only look at one cell. It can perform multiple tests on a single cell, but it can only have one cell reference in it. So when you're trying to debate which should I use, ifs or switch, the simple answer is if you need to test multiple cells, then the ifs function is the right formula, the right function for you. But if you're only testing one cell, use the switch function. And finally, the last of our top 5 new features in Excel 2019 is default pivot table layouts. We will access default pivot table layouts from the File tab of the ribbon, and then let's choose Options all the way down in the lower left-hand corner. And from Options, let's click Data. And here we have in the top half of this window all of our default pivot table options. So I can, for example, say I want to edit the default layout. How do I want the pivot table to appear? Do I want subtotals in place? If so, do I want them at the top or at the bottom? What kind of pivot table options do I want to turn on? All of these are examples of settings that you can save by default for your pivot tables. And then also other settings, for example, disabling automatic grouping of date and time columns. That was something that you might recall got added, the automatic grouping of date and time columns in pivot tables. That got added with Excel 2016, and it's really convenient for those who work on calendar years, but for those of us who might work with fiscal years, that really does get in the way. So you'll notice that I actually have mine set to be disabled. I can still go in and group my data. I can use the automatic grouping options. It's just that all of my future pivot tables are not automatically grouped together. Recognize that once you go in and establish these default pivot table layouts, basically the top half of that window, once you establish those default pivot table layouts, those will apply to all future pivot tables that you create. They will not have any impact whatsoever on existing pivot tables. That's a default pivot table layouts is a feature that many Excel users have been clamoring for a number of years, and we finally pick it up with Excel 2019. Far from an exhaustive listing of all of the new features in Excel 2019, what I've tried to do in this session is give you just a quick overview of the features that I think most Excel users will find to be the most significant. I hope this has been a good investment of time for you. I hope that now you will be able to take advantage of these features and put them to good use. Thank you. We appreciate you stopping by today. We hope that this has been helpful, and I would encourage you to go out to our website, k2e.com, where you can find all kinds of additional information, not only on Excel, but other technologies as these technologies impact accounting, financial, and other business professionals. Once again, thanks. We'll look forward to seeing you again real soon.